Hello, hello, and you are listening to the Food Blogger Pro podcast. My name is Alexa, and I'm part of the Food Blogger Pro team, and you're hearing from me today because Bjork is out on a well-deserved vacation with his family, so you are going to be hearing a FBP Rewind episode from us today. And we're excited to revisit, actually, this interview with Jenna Aaron. She's the general manager of Pinch of Yum, and it's actually from July 2020, so not too long ago, but it's a super interesting interview and kind of deep dive into how Pinch of Yum works with brands. So sponsored content is a great way to monetize your site. It kind of helps you establish relationships with the brands that you love and help promote products you love to your audience and then get paid for that exposure, the exposure that you're giving the brand. So in this episode, you'll learn exactly how the Pinch of Yum team manages their sponsored content process, and it's pretty interesting. They, build a system for handling conversations, connecting with brands, reviewing contracts, and so much more. This is a great interview, especially if you're interested in kind of diversifying your food blogging income. So without any further ado, let's rewind.
Jenna, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, usually we've done a couple events where you are on the literal other side of the wall from me in the office, but COVID has separated us further apart, but not too far apart. Do you want to give a quick update for people who haven't connected with you before or heard you on past podcast episodes or Food Blogger Pro interviews? What's your quick story, your involvement, and your role at Pinch of Yum, and where do you call home?
Yeah, so I have been at Pinch of Yum, I think, 4 or 5 years. I feel like I should know this. It was in January, but been at Pinch of Yum for what feels like quite a while now, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. And I am the communications manager on Team Pinch of Yum. The communications and growth manager. So I do kind of a wide range of things, but I mostly focus in on communication with our readers and communication with our brands. And then on the growth side of things, I also am kind of part of thinking through our SEO strategy and finding ways to grow our traffic. And then within those things as well, kind of related to growth and communication is sponsored content. So I manage all of our sponsored relationships. That's another large part of my job, just in the day-to-day of speaking with brands and managing the editorial content for brands and the reporting, kind of from A to Z, kind of cover that whole swath.
I feel like it's a great example of, there are people in the world who it's like, there are different people in the world who are good at different things. And I don't think I've ever recognized that in a way that I have in doing business and working with the team. And like the things that you are good at, I'm so glad that you're doing those because you are so good at them and I would not be good at them. and it's funny to think back to that moment when you came, and I remember interviewing, it was at the old office that we had, which was a super awesome office. And if anybody ever went to like a Pinch of Yum workshop to do the photography workshop, you know that it was just this like beautiful space, but it was also huge and it was really cold in the winter. And so we had kind of sectioned off this little like conference room area, and we did an interview there. And I think the position that you came in at started, it was just like, it was a part-time position. And then quickly we were like, oh my gosh, Jenna's incredible and does incredible work. And we need to figure out how we can have you help with these areas that you're good at. Communications kind of being the broad category, but like you said, some subcategories underneath that. One being sponsored content. So can you remember back to like the first time that you started to get involved with the Pinch of Yum sponsored content? What was that like early stages? And curious to know, like, did you come into it knowing like, hey, here are some ideas, some things we want to do? Or do you feel like for you personally, and then also with Lindsay, was it kind of building that as you went and building kind of the system from the ground up?
Yeah. So when I first came on the team, like you said, I was part-time office manager, but my background is in communications, which is helpful. And when I first came on, I think maybe Pinch of Yum had been doing sponsored content for like 1 to 2 years, maybe more on the 2 year end of things. And we worked with a agency that actually managed all of our sponsored content, that did a lot of our outreach and also just managed the campaigns and just kind of gave direction to Lindsay from the brands. They were kind of like a conduit between the brand and their PR agency and us. And so they, for really, I think my first year, maybe year and a half, they were the ones that we worked with. And so at first my role was mostly just to kind of then be the communicator between this agency and Lindsay, just to make sure that she had the deadlines that she needed and that we were meeting all the requirements for the campaign. And so I had a pretty small role, I would say, at first, just because this agency we worked with really did all of the heavy lifting for us, which was great. But then I want to say maybe like a year to a year and a half, we decided for a variety of reasons that we wanted to bring our sponsored content in-house. So we wanted our team to manage it and not work with an agency. And so that was kind of the point where we had this experience, obviously, working with this agency and how they did their processes, but there are some things that we maybe wanted to change. And just kind of do what felt like worked just best and better for our team. And so that's kind of the point where me and Lindsay sat down. And I feel like it was just because I think we stopped working with the agency at the end of the year, like in December, and we started planning to make the transition really, I think, in the middle of summer, just to give us like almost a 6-month lead up to bringing it all in-house, because it is just so many moving pieces and so many things. I mean, they managed our contracts, our reporting, all of the communication with the brand, all of our pitching. They did everything. And so to move it in-house was kind of a bear of a project. And so, so that was kind of our job for like those 6 months, was to kind of put the things in place. And thankfully, actually, a lot of the things that we put in place for that process are still alive and running today. So we've done some tweaks along the way, but mostly what we kind of put in place has felt like it's worked really well for us.
Yeah. One of the great things is, as we get into it, we've realized, hey, there are tools, there are solutions, there are things that we can use to put together to help us build kind of our system for sponsored content. We're going to talk about some of those things, but to fill out the picture a little bit, you had talked about working with this agency. The agency was called Sway, and still around today. We don't use Sway, but at the same time where we decided, because we had the bandwidth and the ability to bring it in-house, I think that was around the same time that Sway actually said they're going to wind down. I forget what the program was, but it was like more of like a boutique, individualized relationship with some bigger sites that they would manage those relationships into, I think, what they called Massive Sway, which was more large, like working with a larger number of people across a wider swath of sites. So it actually worked out really well, where they were like, hey, we're winding this down. We're like, hey, actually interesting, we're taking this in-house. And in doing that, though, suddenly, like you said, had to create these systems around setting that up. And it was important for us because sponsored content was a good way for us to diversify. One of the things you hear a lot in business is this idea of diversification and needing to think not only about getting revenue from one source. At the point when we started, it was really ads, but diversifying that out into other sources. So sponsored content was a natural first place for us to do that. What were some of the first big categories of areas that we had to figure out systems for? So an example being, a contract comes in. Like, oh, now suddenly we are having to look at contracts and review those. So if you can think of, as it relates to sponsored content, are there different kind of areas that we need to think about and have a system for in terms of our process?
Yeah, so there are a few kind of big things that we had to put in place that weren't necessarily things that Sway had done, or just parts of their process that we didn't know about. The first big thing that we had to put in place was finding a way to do intake for brands. And with where Pinch of Yum is at this point, and back then when we were doing this, a lot of we haven't had to do a lot of pitching, which is it's great. I'm really grateful for that. So that means we get a lot of brands that approach us and want to work with us. And we had to think of a way to just do an intake of that and what that process looked like from there. And so one of the biggest pieces we put together was an intake form. And so when someone does reach out to do sponsored content, we are able to send this form, and we thought a lot about the things that we wanted to put in the form, things like budget, what their goals are, the timing of the campaign, and things like that. And so with that information, we're able to make more of a decision on if we're interested in continuing the conversation and moving forward. So that was one of the biggest pieces, was that.
Yeah. And if I remember right, is there a thread on Food Blogger Pro forum, or maybe an area within Food Blogger Pro, I should know this, but that outlines some of those questions that we ask? So essentially, like when a brand reaches out, what questions are we asking them? I think we highlight that somewhere on the forum. We'll link to it in the show notes for Food Blogger Pro members if needed.
Yeah.
And then use for that just like a surveying tool. We use Typeform to collect those answers. But one of the things that I love about that is it helps us to have some of to put some of the things on the table that otherwise would have been delayed to a phone call and maybe is a little bit weirder to ask. Like, can you talk about some of the most important elements with that intake form and why we include those?
Yeah, yep, for sure. One of the things that is kind of an obvious one is talking about their budget, which is kind of an awkward conversation of who kind of approaches who first about it. And so the nice thing about having a form, and we don't have like a blank space for them to put what their campaign budget is, but we have some ranges of some rates. And then we also have an option to say, this is outside of my budget. And so it's nice to be able to just get a feel for where they're at. And it's never been like, oh, if they only have this much, then it's a definite no. But that's just something we take into consideration. There's so many different elements that we think about when we decide to work with a brand. So that's one big one that felt really essential is the budget. And then I would say another one is the timing of the campaign, because they might say it might be, it's July 1st as we're recording this today, and they could say, we're looking at July 15th. And in that case, we need to know that, because that would either mean we can't make that happen so quick, or we have to charge more, or kind of whatever that looks like. So that's another big one. And then I would say maybe the third one is just getting a sense of like what products they're looking to have us use in the recipe or in our content. Because we could get approached by a huge brand that has so many products, but we want to know exactly what products they're looking for. And so those are kind of the really specifics. We obviously ask about like, what are your goals, or how did you hear about Pinch of Yum? And those are super helpful as well. But having those specifics, the budget, the timing, the products, those are kind of big ones for us to have to kind of start considering whether we want to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Can you talk about what that phone conversation looks like? Because let's say we look at it, trade some emails back and forth. It seems like, hey, this might be a potential fit. I think that's kind of a scary thing for people in general. Maybe they have done it before, and it always is a little bit weird and awkward, especially if we're used to like communicating via email and social media and blog posts, to jump on a call and then talk about these really like things that we normally don't talk about, like money and how much somebody's going to spend.
Yeah.
How do you have those conversations in a way that feels natural and not only feels natural, but also communicates to the brand like, hey, we have your best interest as well. Like, it's not just us saying like, it's not just us doing an interview and saying, do we want you or do you not? But also us trying to say like, are we going to be the best fit for you? Any advice that you'd have for people who are maybe a little bit nervous about doing that, or tips or tricks that you might give them to have those conversations?
Yeah, yep. I would say it's not every brand that wants to jump on a call, but I would say there's quite a few that usually want to kind of take you through a brief, or they have specific questions. The biggest tip I would have, and this is something I did at first, and I do still actually use it as a reference when I do have calls with brands, is I created like a sponsored call sheet. And so it basically outlines all the things that I would want to hit and ask about when I'm on a call with them. And so that would include just asking about their goals, like do they want exposure? Do they want engagement, direct sales, or signups, or something like that? And then kind of talking to them also about how they've worked with influencers in the past for doing recipe development and what that process looks like, whether it's very collaborative or more independent. And so it's kind of an opportunity to hear from them, but also kind of tell them also what our process is. And also just some clarifying questions about like key messaging and what their timeline might be. And then on this call sheet at the end, I typically have, what is your budget? So not leading the call with how much money do you have to spend here, but kind of leaving that, like talk about the big picture goals and what that looks like. And then with talking about budget too, I've always found that it's helpful to just talk about or ask them what is a range of rate that you feel comfortable with. And also asking what's a cap that you can't go over.
Sure.
So it's not like throw out a number to us, but it's like what is, just getting a feel for what the range is, and also gives you an opportunity, if you have a rate sheet and a media kit, to just kind of go over that and talk about how it's structured and what that would look like.
Yeah. Can you talk about the difference between a rate sheet and a media kit, and maybe how people can create kind of a basic version of each one of those?
Yeah, yep. So for us, our media kit and our rate sheet are combined into one. And part of that is kind of just for simplicity. And so it's combined so that we can just send one file to the brand. And the first page of it is just, it's kind of like a letter from Lindsay, which I would definitely recommend for anyone creating one, just kind of a welcome to Pinch of Yum in a way, and talk about how the brand got started or the blog got started, and kind of where it is today and why we enjoy working with brands. And then that part of the media kit also includes some of just kind of the stats of Pinch of Yum, like our monthly page views, our Instagram followers, and followers on other social media platforms, as well as email subscribers. So that is what I'd consider like the media kit portion, is like, this is who we are, included, like we have a picture of Lindsay on it. So that's kind of the media kit portion. And then separate from that is, I would say, like a rate sheet. And so our rate sheet is rate sheets, because we have 3 different categories, because we work with brands on blog posts, but also doing recipe videos, and then also with Instagram stories. And so we have kind of a separate sheet for each of those. And the way that we have it broken down is you can buy packages. And so basically, like the more videos you decide to do in a campaign, the cheaper each of those individual videos will be. And that's kind of where we landed at the beginning of creating these, and also consulting with Danielle Liss, who is our legal expert, but also has a lot of experience working with influencers. And it's served us pretty well of being able to offer like a discount if they do a longer term campaign, because that's really in our best interest too, is to work with less brands for a longer period of time. So it's kind of an incentive that also serves us and our readers well too, since it's there's just consistent brands that appear on the blog rather than a smattering of so many throughout the year.
Yeah. So I think that was one of the things as we have evolved little by little the process for Pinch of Yum. A learning for me was this idea of a brand. I don't think this is always how it works, but a version of this existing for Pinch of Yum, a brand saying, here's our budget, and us saying, here's the deliverables that we can match up to that. Versus, I think what I had always imagined was somebody saying, I want this, a blog post, how much is it? And
Yep.
and us as a brand or us as a blog kind of guiding brands and saying,
Yep.
what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? Which I heard you say some of those things. What is your budget? And then us coming to them and saying, here's how we think we can help you accomplish that. Would you be able to break it down in terms of like 50-50, 60-40 percentage wise? How often does a brand come to Pinch of Yum and say, here's exactly what I want, a blog post and a video on Instagram, versus a brand coming and saying, I kind of want to partner with Pinch of Yum. What would be the best way to do that if we want to achieve this goal? And it being a little bit more ambiguous and essentially asking us to advise on it.
Yeah, I would say probably it is kind of a 60-40 split, with 60 being brands coming with an exact idea of what type of content they want to do and how many they want to do. And then 40 being the brands that approach us and just say, we really enjoy Pinch of Yum and we would love to work with you. What would you recommend? And of course, the kind of 40% is really the sweet spot, because I think it's really awesome to see when a brand knows that you know your blog best and you know your readers the best. And so, based on the information they give you about their goals and their products, and their budget, kind of what the best fit is. Because there might be someone approaching us who doesn't have a huge budget, but their product is like perfect for Instagram stories. And so being able to kind of steer them in that direction, that's a lower rate, to kind of create a package and kind of like have that, I guess, kind of trust from a brand of like, your readers the best, your recipes and your brand the best. So like, you tell us what you can make happen with this rate. That's like the perfect, like it's just the sweet spot really, in creating a package for someone.
Can you talk through like if something isn't sweet spot or even quite a bit outside of sweet spot, whether it be a request for the type of content or even the product, not that it's necessarily a bad product, but maybe not a fit for Pinch of Yum as a brand or the audience. How do you know, and what is that conversation like for you and Lindsay as you think through like, hey, this proposal came through, this brand is interested, they have a budget, and obviously there's a luxury involved in even being able to say no, acknowledging that. But I also think that there's strategy in protecting your brand and not just taking anything that comes in from a revenue perspective. It's like great to have that, but then you are in some ways trading that for your brand reputation. How does Pinch of Yum go about those conversations? And assuming like it's kind of you and Lindsay thinking through that, talking through that, what are the primary considerations and how do you communicate that back to the brand?
Yeah, it's definitely something that does happen quite a bit. And I feel like there's been such an evolution of this for us over the past 3 years, really since we started this, where I feel like maybe at the beginning, we were just kind of more like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Like not really realizing the fact that like, oh no, we can, I hate to say push back, but kind of, and make a recommendation that feels more in line with our brand. And I feel like, especially even into this year, I feel like we really found our footing in that, of one, again, it is a luxury, but being okay with saying no to something if it's not a good fit. And also being okay with pushing back. I can't find a better phrase to say than that right now, but being willing to say, you know what, we actually don't think like that product in your portfolio will be a great fit on the site, but we really think that this one will. And we found this also on your website. Or saying, we don't think that that'll be a great fit on a blog post. These are the reasons why. And this is why we think it would make for a great Instagram video with Instagram stories. And so I feel like it's taken us some time to realize that, like we are kind of like the protectors of the brand of Pinch of Yum. And so being okay with either just walking away, which is really, really hard. It's very hard. Or being willing to kind of see if you can find a compromise. And I would say like, maybe like 50% of the time we're able to find that compromise with the brand of saying, we think this might be a good fit. And they say, okay, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. So the worst they can do is say no. And like,
right.
And it's, I think it can feel like maybe like you're being pushy or being like ungrateful or something, but you also like know your brand the best. And so you have every right to make recommendations outside of their initial brief that they sent over.
Yeah, I think it's, it's interesting to think about other professionals. And if I think of what we are doing, we are professionals in especially you and Lindsay, professionals in speaking to a group of people about a certain thing. In our case, it's recipes, it's food content. And we know from 10 years of doing that, what will go well and what won't go well, and not perfectly, but have a pretty good sense of that. And I think of the other professionals in my life, and a doctor, for instance, I might come in and kind of have my Google researched idea and kind of present that. Hey, here's why I think I have knee pain. He's like, well, yes, let me hear what you're saying and give you some feedback on that. I'm not going to take that as the ultimate answer of what would be best. I'll evolve that a little bit, or like go into a store. And if I say, hey, I want these running shoes. And they're like, hey, those are good shoes, but let me hear a little bit about what your overall goal is, and maybe we'll refine that a little bit. I can imagine for a brand coming to a publisher and doing the same thing, presenting what they think would potentially be the best idea, for a blogger or a publisher to come back to them and say, hey, what's your overall goal? Let me propose to you something that I actually think will help you accomplish that better and will fit into what we do better as well. I think that's really valuable. Like that in and of itself offers value to the brand without an official relationship. And I think it's helpful to develop that skill and to be confident in doing that. So I think that's a great point. Let's say that it moves to the point where we say, yeah, this works out. The brand is interested in working with us, and we go into the next phase, which is probably some sort of contract. Can you talk about what that looks like? Is it always the brand sending a contract? Are we ever sending a contract to them? And how do we go about looking through that and making sure that we're not also, including our dog Sage in the agreement as a part of the exchange?
As a part of the compensation or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like this is maybe the part that we started out knowing absolutely nothing, and we still know absolutely nothing, but we were able to find a way to make it work by bringing someone else into the fold. And so at first, when we were doing contracts, and again, Sway, the agency, used to do all of our contracts. And so this was completely new. And so at first, and to answer one of your questions in it, I'd say 99.9% of the time, it's a brand sending the contract to us and not us sending one to them. I can literally only think of one instance we have ever sent a contract to a brand. Mm-hmm. And so we were receiving these contracts and understanding maybe 50% of it, because we are not lawyers or legal experts. And so a lot of it was done by Googling or just really making our best judgment based on what we thought we understood about it. And so it definitely worked. And like understanding like that was just the resources we had at the time. And that was what worked for us. And overall, like it was totally fine. It worked. And I think it was maybe a little over a year ago that we got connected with Danielle Liss, who's the legal expert on Food Blogger Pro. And we decided to start just outsourcing that. And so, and now the process is, instead of it coming in and me and Lindsay kind of scratching our heads and making our best judgment, I'm able to kind of do a first pass and look at the things that are most important to us from kind of a big picture stance. But then I'm able to pass that off to Danielle and have her look at really the second half of the contract, which is all of the legalese and the jargon that we don't necessarily understand. And so that has been, I feel like that was one of our best decisions that we made, because it's a lot of pressure on yourself to make sure you're fully understanding what you are signing and committing to, especially if it's a long-term contract for a year. It's a lot to process and a lot to do. And so it's been helpful to have her. One of the other things that we have done is kind of create a checklist for ourselves of things that we need to see on a contract. And so instead of looking at a contract and feeling kind of dazed, we know going into it exactly what we need to look at. And so we can kind of take that first pass and know. And even if we weren't using Danielle and it was still just us doing it internally, it was so helpful to have kind of a checklist to go through whenever a contract came in. So we had some sense of direction, and like we knew like at least these big things that are most important to us are covered. So that was also really helpful as well.
Yeah, it makes such a big difference when you can start to bring those people in. And it's part of the business growth process where inevitably there will be a stage where you're in the early stages, you're doing it all on your own, and you're reviewing a contract, and maybe the contract isn't enough to justify having a lawyer review it. So you're kind of trying to do it on your own and Google it. And, we've definitely been there and get that. But it is one of those great feelings to, once you have grown to the point where you can justify paying somebody to help out, just it's super helpful to take that weight off, to take that burden off of, whether it be you or Lindsay or me. Like none of us really looked forward to doing that. And also none of us really had the background to understand a lot of what the contract was saying. And therefore had to do a lot of work to fill in those, to fill in the picture for that. So I think also of the example, I love doing like IT support type stuff, and that's my background and what I did in a previous life. But realize like, okay, we have a team, 13 people, 13 computers. There are issues that come up. And so we hired a IT company that can help out with that and do that remotely. So over time, you start to realize these are the different functions and components that you can outsource. But another thing that you can do is, this isn't related to contracts, but it's related to systems and trying to figure out ways to alleviate work. And one of the ways that we're able to do that in a pretty significant way is on the reporting side of things and using Influence Kit. Can you talk about why reports are important, and then what we used to do and then what we do now for how we communicate with brands?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And this is, again, kind of a big thing that has evolved since the beginning. I feel like I started this saying most of it's the same since when we started, but as I'm talking, I realize
it's like,
and I feel like that's,
in spirit, it's the same, but it's kind of like Pokemon, where it's like you get have you ever done the Pokemon game?
Like Pokemon Go?
Yeah, like the iOS game, like the app.
I think so. I don't know if I have actually, but I know what it is.
So the neighborhood that you're in, we used to live in the same neighborhood, is a great Pokemon neighborhood. So if I have one piece of advice for you, Jenna, coming out of this call, it's to play Pokemon. But I feel like it's the Pokemon that we picked for our sponsored content team. Like all of those, this is a terrible analogy. I just want to call myself out on it. All of those, it's the same things. It's just like they have evolved into stronger, better, more capable versions of the original things that we have picked.
Yes, for sure. And I feel like so much of it, I don't know if this also goes along with your analogy or not, because I have not played the game.
Please continue to build on it. Yes, please do. But
I also feel like, and I was thinking about this when we're talking about like the sponsored content checklist, like for the contract, is that was really built from like trial and error. Like we would realize halfway through a contract, oh, we didn't realize this was in there and we don't want to do this again. And so it got added to the checklist so that next time we go through a contract, this does not happen again.
Do you have an example of, I think people would be curious to know like one or two of what those things maybe were.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I have it just pulled up right now. And one of the biggest things that we didn't think about at first was being very explicit about editorial control. And so the thing we were running into was we would start on a campaign with a brand and realize that they had a very different idea of the control that they would have over the writing and the photos and the videos. And so we shifted to kind of create a list of all the language that needs to be included to say that it will be in the Pinch of Yum style in writing. Like they can't make any changes beyond factual or like grammatical changes. The voice of Pinch of Yum stays intact. And then even just like some of the editorial control as far as being completely specific about the number of concepts that we send, the number of rounds of edits, the number of photos that will have the product in it. We just found that the contract is what you can fall back on. And so we needed to be so explicit about things. And so I feel like our list started with maybe like 10 things and it's grown to, I'm looking at it, it's like 20 to 30 items that we slowly added based on, like I said, trial and error, where we get through a contract and say, oh, like this, it'd be really nice if this was made more clear. So
yeah, that's great. That would be, I think it'd be worth gathering those and posting those. We can work with Alexa to post those on the Food Blogger Pro forums. Obviously kind of boring to read through all of them. But worth pointing out the ones that are generic enough to apply to everybody. Here are some of the things that we've learned along the way. So we'll work on doing that for Food Blogger Pro members. Anyways, we diverted from our Pokemon Go conversation around
reporting. Yes. Yep. So again, this is something that's changed quite a bit over time. And so at first we kind of created like a templated report that we would send each brand. And I have also a design background, which is really helpful. And so we created this like really cool PDF design that we could kind of just plug in the numbers and plug in the photos and the brand's name. And that worked really well for quite a while. It was kind of tedious to have to do that each time, just working within like a design frame instead of like a spreadsheet. That was pretty simple, but we wanted it to be really visually appealing. And so we would send the PDF, like usually like a week or two after the campaign ended. And then we would send another one at the conclusion of like the full year-long campaign. And so those were kind of our two touch points when we would send reporting to brands. And I think it was maybe last fall or later last year, we did get in touch with Bruno at Influence Kit, and we transitioned our reporting over to there. And that I feel like was another like excellent decision, because it saves us so much time. I'm able to just take out like the Instagram photo link and plug it in, and it populates all of the stats that I need, which is just amazing. And so like the time saving for us was amazing, but I think honestly, the biggest thing was that the stats are all updated in real time. And so when I send the link to the report to a brand, it's not like when I used to just send the PDF, it was like a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a long-term view of how the post was doing. And so now they can reference it anytime and they can see how many likes the Instagram post has or how many views the video has. And so it's able to take in and even more than we were able to share before, like we can connect our email campaign or our email service and our web notification service. And we're kind of able to bring it all together. So it ended up being a really good fit for us because it saved us a lot of time, and it just, it gives a fuller picture view to brands and it just has more longevity to it. So that's just, it's been really, really helpful to be able to manage it in that way. And I feel like brands have been really excited by it too. Cause sometimes they would contact us a month after we sent the PDF report and say, can we get an update? And so we'd have to like go back in and change the PDF and send it again. So it just, it created a really smooth process for us.
Yeah, that's great. And Bruno actually talked about, he talks about with the reports, to go back to that rate sheet, one of the things that he had mentioned was like, hey, that's a value add. If you are going above and beyond just a report, like if you're doing it once a quarter or multiple times, to say like, hey, we can continually send you updated reports. Here's the line item for that, which is one of the things that we didn't talk about, but is worth mentioning, is for those rate sheets for Pinch of Yum, we kind of have this a la carte area. And I feel like that's been important development for us too, where it's not like we just say one blog post and then we assume like, hey, that also means a post to Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and an email. Like, building those out as a la carte items that people can add, there's an additional cost for that because there's additional value that comes with it. And even the potential, we don't do this, but even the potential as a place for creators to think about adding in the report as a way to kind of add an a la carte item or additional reports.
Yeah, definitely.
We covered a lot, and there's a lot more that we could cover. And obviously, as you talked about at the beginning, Jenna, this is like one area of the many things that you do for Pinch of Yum, of which you do such a great job. We're so lucky to have you on the team. You're active in the Food Blogger Pro forums when questions come up. So if there's any members, they can leave a question there, and we'll see if Jenna can jump in and answer that question. Jenna, I want to end by asking you a couple questions. Number one, when the world isn't in a state of shutdown and somebody comes to the Twin Cities, what restaurant would you point them to? Where should they go if they're going to be in the Twin Cities in a restaurant that they should check out?
Okay, so of course, I can't just mention one.
Restaurants.
I'm going to mention two.
Okay.
Yes. So like a classic, which if anyone listening has come to a workshop you've maybe gone to, is a restaurant called Bar La Grassa.
Love it.
In Minneapolis, in the North Loop. It's Italian, it's pasta and bruschetta, and it's just so good. So that would be one. That's kind of like, it's been there a long time, but a new restaurant across the river in St. Paul is a restaurant called Estelle. And we actually, during these COVID times, my husband and I have been getting takeout from there. So we've gotten takeout from there like 3 or 4 times. And I forget what kind of, I want to say it's kind of South American influence, but they also have like amazing pasta, and it's just, and when it's not COVID times, they have like an amazing bar, a cute little tucked away bar to sit at. So both like of them are pasta, which is pretty predictable.
For Lindsay and I, you are like our like restaurant review editor, writer. Like, not that you're actually, it's just for our team internally. I feel like you're so well researched around where to go. We just come to you to figure out where that is. So I trust your opinion and insight on that entirely. Jenna, thanks so much for coming on, for talking through this stuff. Thanks for all that you do.
Yeah.
And
thanks for having me.
Maybe have you back on here in the near future.
All right. Sounds good.
And that's a wrap for this episode, this FBP Rewind episode of the Food Blogger Pro podcast. Thanks so much again for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed revisiting this episode, and we hope that you got some sort of takeaway from this episode. If you're interested in diversifying your income, like I mentioned in the intro, or maybe you're interested in just kind of leveling up your current sponsored content game, we hope this episode was helpful. And if it was, we would love to hear from you. If you go to foodbloggerpro.com/podcast, you'll find the show notes for this episode. We'd love to hear a takeaway that you had from this episode. If you have something that you think you're going to incorporate into your current process, or maybe something completely new and that you never thought of, some really interesting aha moment, we would love to hear from you. And of course, Food Blogger Pro, the podcast, is just one part of how we support bloggers and online creators like you. We also have a membership site that is just full of different resources, different lesson videos, live Q&As, giveaways, deals, and so much more for food creators who are looking to grow their content online. So if you'd like to learn more about our membership, you can go to foodbloggerpro.com/membership and get signed up. We have a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it out for 2 whole months, risk-free. And if you decide it's not a good fit for you, we don't think that'll happen, but just in case it does, you can get a full refund within 60 days. So pretty risk-free if you ask me. But of course, if you have any questions, just reach out. But again, we appreciate you listening to this episode. We'll see you next time, next Tuesday. And until then, make it a great week.